evening, everyone, and welcome to this program, Writing the War. Conflicts on Europe's doorstep, such as the war in Ukraine and Gaza, are reshaping journalistic practices. Gathered with us tonight are 5 speakers from all over Europe that have reported on the wars in either Ukraine or Gaza. And this evening is part of the European Dialogues, a series of events initiated by Institut Français and organized in partnership with the Balie and with a lot of other partners, which you can see behind me on the screen. My name is Veronika Dorman. I'm a program editor here at the Balie, and I will moderate this evening here tonight. And I would like to give the first word to David Behar, the director of Institut Français. And I also have a question for you. Why should we talk about this tonight here in Amsterdam?
So, hi everyone. So I'm the director of the Institut Français NL. This cycle is important for us because this event tonight is specifically important because it's part of a larger cycle that was commenced last autumn in Prague. And then it made stops then in Vilnius in Lithuania, then in Warsaw, and after Amsterdam it will go to Helsinki, to Sofia and Plovdiv actually, and then to Rennes eventually, which is the headquarters of West France, which is one of the main partners of this cycle. The cycle in the face of war, European dialogue, aims to support public debate in Europe against the backdrop of geopolitical upheaval and highly polarized public opinion. By bringing together expert voices from across the continent and encouraging direct interaction with the general public, the European dialogue aims to contribute to a better understanding of the challenges we all face, as well as the local context in which they are unfolding. The cycle also involves students from Université Paris 8, from Paris, and in each city there are cooperations and workshops with a local university, this time the University of Amsterdam, and 10 students from Paris and students from UvA had a day of workshops, and during the break between our 2 events tonight, you will be able to see the maps that the students have come up with to answer the question, where is Europe in Amsterdam in this case. The Amsterdam in itself is an important step for the cycle because it is the first of this series of events taking place in the capital of a founding member state, of a founding European member state, which adds a special dimension at a time when the European project is being transformed from one of economic cooperation into a geopolitical project in the face of the return of war to our continent. And before I give you back the floor, I wanted to thank especially all our partners, all the cycles partners, so the Grand Continent, Ouest France, Reporters sans Frontières, Arte, Université Paris 8, but also the European Cultural Foundation, who has helped us organize tonight's program, and of course our main partner in crime, the Balie, who has done a fantastic job.
Well, thank you
in putting together this exceptional evening of debate.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, David Behar. Then I would like to welcome Anastasia Taylor-Lind. She's a British-Swedish photojournalist and poet. She's a National Geographic Society Explorer, TED Fellow, and 2016 Nieman Fellow at Harvard University. Over the past 20 years, Taylor-Lind has reported on war, women, and violence. This year, she has been appointed as the World Press Photo Europe Jury Chair. Give her a warm applause.
Thank you so much. And good evening. It's so lovely to be here with you all to share some reporting, some photographs from Ukraine, and also to share some ideas about this reporting. When I took this photograph on the left, on the screen behind some of you here, or above your heads here, it was one of the first times I'd met the Grinnik family. They used to live in Avdiivka, a suburb of Donetsk city, in the Donbass region of eastern Ukraine. And it was little Miroslava, who you can see feeding an apple to their horse, who showed me around their neighborhood. "This is where the horse lives," she said when we walked past the paddock. And later when we went outside, she said, pointing to the checkpoint at the end of the street, "This is where the soldiers live." So one of the questions that have arisen from our reporting is whether war and peace, normal everyday life, can exist simultaneously. Is war an event or a series of events, or is it a structure that builds up around people's ordinary lives? 5K from the front line, as this project is called, started on Instagram, and with a really simple idea. Together with writer and anthropologist Elisa Sopova, who is herself from Donetsk city, which has been occupied since 2014, we would travel along the front line, making pictures and reporting on the lives of people who lived between 50 meters, as Miroslava and her family did, and 5 kilometers of frontline positions. In the center here, you can see Elena. Elena and her husband, Rodion, lived in Opitna, which fell inside the gray zone, the designated part between the two front lines, if you like. The gray zone, which has existed since 2014. Elena and Rodion, like many of the people we followed, were hesitant to leave their communities. It's a common story that younger relatives or neighbors stay to take care of people who would find it hard to survive alone. In Opitna, there were elderly people who even relied on Elena to cut their toenails. So at the end of 2022, Opitna was occupied by Russian forces. But just before it fell, Elena was weeding the watermelon patch in her garden when she heard the whistle of an incoming shell. And she turned, knowing that it was close, to run towards the house. And she was hit with 2 pieces of rather large shrapnel, one in her right buttock and one just narrowly missing her spinal cord in the middle of her back. And I made this picture a few weeks after she'd been injured, while her and Rodion were staying in Pokrovsk, a town that at that time was considered quite far back from the front line, but now, as Russian forces advance all over Donbass region, and Kharkiv also, we'll be hearing from Emmanuelle a little later about that, Pokrovsk may well become the next front line. So this reporting is made in collaboration with Elisa Sopova, who is a journalist, a writer, and now an anthropologist from Donetsk city. We've been working together for 10 years, and we've been working on this project together for 6 years. The pictures that you see here are made between 2018 and last summer. And they are frequently mistaken for being pictures that represent daily life further back from the front line. But as I mentioned already, all of these ordinary scenes exist in the universe of war, if you like, simultaneously, intertwined with very violent events. This is Alexander, Sasha, on the left, and his wife Elena on the right. It's a common story since the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine that families are separated along gender lines. So Sasha ended up in an informal, internally displaced camp in Dnipro Oblast, being unable to leave the country since martial law dictates that men of fighting age must stay. And Elena on the right fled to Poland with her grandson, Nikita. She didn't have enough money to stay there for very long, having initially left with Nikita's mum, her daughter. And so Nikita's mum came back to Kiev, resumed her job so that she could send money to Elena so that they could afford to keep living in Poland. Typically, cycles of displacement are exactly that, cyclical. So at the start of the full-scale invasion, Elena left for Poland. She came back the first summer. Then when the Russians kept hitting the critical infrastructure that caused blackouts, there was no heating, there was no running water. It was very difficult with a young child, so they left again. Then last summer, she came back, and her and Sasha were reunited after about a year. And they've just moved to Kiev, where they've received some more permanent accommodation specifically for people who've been displaced by the war. So in our reporting, text and photography have equal weight. Alyssa isn't writing text to accompany my photographs, and I'm not making photographs to illustrate her text. This project started as an Instagram project. We're both freelancers. And we set ourselves the simple task of making one photograph and recording one story per day and posting it to Instagram that night. We worked together for 9 years in a way that was entirely self-funded and self-initiated until last year, when we got support from the National Geographic Society through a grant, and also the Catchlight Foundation, to develop an educational arm of this project, where we will be running training programs inside newsrooms, sharing what we've learned, not just as journalists, but as an anthropologist, a poet, and a photographer. So this is the Granick family last summer in August, the last time that I saw them. Their family is also divided. Olena got out of Avdiivka pretty early on, about a year before it was captured by Russian forces, and she fled to Poltava with the kids, where she already had extended family. That's Miroslava in the middle of the photograph on the left with her cousins. And Nikolai Kolya, her husband, volunteered to join the army, so he's on a frontline position in the north, near Belarus, the last time that we were in touch. Alyssa and I believe that the power dynamics of international war reporting need to be disrupted, and that a lack of diversity in storytellers themselves contributes to biased war reporting. In our team, we represent the insider, local, and the outsider, foreign perspective. But we need critical members of reporting teams who have lived experiences of the things that we're reporting on. Otherwise, we're contributing to biased war reporting, and particularly harmful tropes and stereotypes around what people look like when they're affected by war. It's common that we tell stories about people in a way that conforms with pre-existing roles, if you like. And when we assign pre-existing roles, those tropes typically fall along gendered stereotypes, with women being depicted as passive and men being depicted as active. So Alyssa and I constantly ask each other, What do the people whose lives we report on, like the Grinic family, think about our pictures? And do they recognize themselves inside our photographs? Thank you very much.
Anastasia, can you join the conversation? And I also want to welcome Sander van Hoorn. He's a Dutch political scientist and journalist for the NOS. In the past, he was a correspondent for NOS in the EU, the Middle East, and North Africa, Israel, and the occupied territories. Van Hoorn reported on the 9/11 attacks, the Arab Spring, and the rise of ISIS. And after the 7th of October 2023, he traveled back to Israel. When did you leave Israel for the last time?
February.
February. And first, before we dive into that, how did you listen to the story of... Oh, I forget someone who should be over there at the screen, all the way from Kharkiv. I hope she will join.
I'm here.
Yes. Emmanuelle Chaze, French independent journalist. She works as a Ukraine correspondent for French international broadcaster, France 24, RFI, and the newspaper West France. With a background in history, literature, and international law. Thank you. She focuses her reporting on Russia's war against Ukraine, war crimes, and EU policy. I don't see you yet.
She's
behind you. Yeah.
I can hear you. Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome, Emmanuelle. Where are you right now?
I'm in Kharkiv. I was very close to Bovchansk today, and we've just been back a few hours ago. So this is one of the hotspots at the moment of the new front line opened by Russia. And now I'm in the city of Kharkiv, which actually was shelled also with gliding bombs just a few hours ago.
And can you tell us a little bit more about the situation over there?
It's a very particular moment here in Kharkiv. We're not too far from the Russian border. We're around 30 kilometers away from the Russian border. We're also 50 kilometers away from that new front line that has been opened only a few days ago. So people are, of course, very worried about the shelling here in the city, but also there's thousands of people who have been evacuated since May 10th, since the beginning of this new Russian offensive here in Kharkiv region. I spent the day talking to elderly people who have left everything behind, who now don't have a home anymore. Some were telling me, I'm not sure if I'm going to see my home ever again. Many were very sad. So it's a very particular moment here in this war for Ukraine, but also for people covering this war.
Mm-hmm. And Sander, how did you listen to the story of Anastasia? Did you recognize parts?
Yeah, it's an ongoing battle to battle stereotypes, because even if you yourself try to prevent stereotypes reporting, then you have the news desk that you have to convince that it's something you should strive for. It begins with, usually editors want to know upfront what you are going to make, and that's one of the things that I do to battle thinking in stereotypes. I refuse that. I just go somewhere and stories will come to you. I usually, especially in the Middle East, work with women as translators and producers, because then you open up a part of the society that normally would be closed to me. So being aware that you are likely, just by the place where you are born, the gender that you have, that you are susceptible to stereotype reporting, that's the first and necessary step that you have to take.
And do you think yeah, okay, go ahead.
You're so right. And also stereotypes or cliches exist because they're true. Yeah. They actually come from truth. That's how they emerge. But I think you're right that the first step is to identify them and hold them in our peripheral vision. Yep. Of course, I there are also stereotypes in my reporting. And additionally, when you get into editorial decisions, for example, about headlines, until 2022, every single report that Alyssa and I published in, let's say, Western mainstream media had the title Europe's Forgotten War, or the frozen conflict in Europe. So even if we worked very hard in the photographs and in the body, the text body, still, there are so many decisions that are outside of our control, and it must be the same.
The problem, of course, it's layered, because stereotypes being true, it also helps to convey the message, because it's like easy, people understand at home what they are looking at. So if you have another meaning to your reporting, using stereotypes can also help conveying like a complicated message.
Do you have an example of a good stereotype and a bad one?
Difficult. But I mean, the first stereotype is like when you do live reporting, you always get the question, what do Israelis, what do Ukrainians think about? And there's no such thing. I mean, look at the Netherlands or France. Like, there's this multitude of opinions and ways of life, and you have that in conflict areas as well. I mean, reporting from Ukraine, whether you're Russian or Ukrainian speaking, that it does make a difference. Yeah. Yeah.
And Emmanuelle, I also heard you say, Anastasia, do you need lived experience to report on the war? What do you think? Is that an advantage?
It definitely is. Actually, when I first came to Ukraine, it was in April 2022. I had never been to Ukraine before, and to be honest, I spent the entire rest of that year coming for quite long missions here, assignments here, and I realized the depths of the prejudices I could have on Ukraine simply because I didn't know. And I moved to Ukraine in January 2023 because I really wanted to come closer to Ukrainian society. I didn't want to just come for a mission, stay in a hotel, and then move back and get disconnected from the contacts I had. I really wanted to have this this really lived experience and continuous experience being with Ukrainians, alongside Ukrainians. Of course, it's a personal choice, but I also see how it helps me in my daily reporting to feel things in a certain way that I couldn't feel when I was on assignment. Of course, not every reporter can move to a zone they cover, but that's the choice I've made, and it's definitely made a difference, and for me, for the better for my reporting.
And by now, I think you speak the language as well.
I'm learning, yes, I'm learning. And
because that's for example, also important, I think.
It definitely breaks the barrier as well. Right now, I still have baby Ukrainian, but I can still make a few sentences. When I arrived in Kharkiv on Monday, the first person I met, I was talking with her in Ukrainian, and she was telling me, "Oh, you have such a nice Ukrainian, such a sweet accent." And people they open up much more easily when they see that you have an interest in their culture. And you don't need to be fluent, but even just learning a few words and showing a person that you take an interest, a genuine interest in their culture, in their language, it makes such a difference, especially when there's a war against also Ukrainian culture that is being waged here for decades now. It does change things.
May I just add something, Emmanuelle? I don't know if you can see me, but you can probably hear me. I just want to sort of acknowledge as well this sort of strange reality that we're living in. Like, you're sitting in Kharkiv, a city that's being bombed and hit by missiles. We're sitting here in like a fancy, peaceful, warm, quiet room in Amsterdam. And I mean, I guess I just want to point out as well that like all of the ideas and the conversations and the discussions that it's possible to have when we're in this space, and I know you also occupy this space probably a lot of the time too, is a completely different time and reality to when you're on the ground reporting as you have been today. I don't know if you heard me speak, but I just want to reiterate that, when I'm out there like you are at the moment, working near the front line, wearing my flak jacket, making pictures, I'm just trying to make pictures and stay alive. The idea of the intellectual, nuanced idea of like how we represent. I mean, my first goal is just to make pictures and then be able to keep them, right? So it's almost like there are two spaces that I occupy in my body, but I'm also really feeling it here with you now, knowing. Sorry?
Some tension.
Some tension. It's just like it's a different reality that Emmanuelle's in. It really is.
About the pictures. Sorry. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say something. I'm also quite moved because actually, Anastasia, I don't know if you remember, we've met in Kiev. We met in something that is also part, unfortunately, of the reality lived by Ukrainians here. At the funeral, we were both at the funeral of Victoria and Melina, and we saw each other afterwards, and that's how we met. And as you were talking, I did hear you, and I was very moved because we live in that reality that when we work, we are also like near death every time. Just before coming on air, I was asked to connect, and I was a bit late, and I was late because I have a friend who got injured. Who's at the hospital, he was at the front line, and I was just checking if he was okay. He's okay.
Is he okay?
He's okay. He's all right. He could write, so he's all right. But this is something that, of course, you see, you're being shocked. For me, it is something that is daily life, and we have that different reality that is that of a war. And we tend, for example, myself, I tend to forget that there is a normal world outside where people are gathering to talk about how they write in a room in Amsterdam where I would love to join. But right now, I still, my hands are still dusty. I still feel, the weight of the flat jackets. I still can smell the stress of the people I was talking to, who were just coming out of Beauchamp, who were in tears, who just had their lives packed in some plastic bag they could carry. So yeah, it's very, there's a lot of emotions and a lot of tensions.
And are there certain ways to cope with that better?
Probably talking about it. Probably talking about it.
Anastasia, I want to ask you a question about your pictures, because you said I'm just making pictures, but when I saw them, they're not the most violent images. Why?
Well, I'm not the only photographer working in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, I am freer to follow my heart in terms of the stories that I want to tell. I'm not reporting news, and there is like the Ukrainian journalism community, and specifically Ukrainian photojournalists are just, I can't even describe them, just like the best storytellers in the world, and doing such an amazing job while also dealing with the realities of having a war of aggression against your country. So I make pictures knowing that my work is only one small piece of the puzzle, and that I don't have to do everything, because collectively, we're all contributing to the visual representation of...
But there's a reason why you choose this contribution.
Well, I'm working, part of the limitation, thank you for pressing me on it, part of the limitation is the camera that I use. I'm working on a medium format film camera. Mm-hmm. So I use an external handheld light meter. It's a camera I hold at waist level. I have 12 photographs on a roll of film. The pictures are mostly square. The rectangular ones were made on a digital camera, so there's a bit of a mix. But I've almost always, since I was, 20, used this camera, Hasselblad. And so that has some pretty big limitations. The fastest shutter speed it has is 500th of a second. So it's a manual focus. I mean, I miss anything that happens quickly. So there's sort of...
But you're talking about the limitations now, but there's really beautiful images you're catching. And I'm sure tonight I will still think about that girl with the apple in her hand. So...
Thank you.
I think you choose also to make some pictures that are really from great value.
Thank you very much for the affirmation. We all need that sometimes. I feel my answer is inadequate. And what else to say except I'm the one who presses the button, but my work together with Elisa Sopova and also Dima, who is our local producer, also from occupied Donetsk city. I mean, everything that happens in order for me to be standing somewhere with the camera in my hands, having already focused, use the light meter and pressing the button is because of our work together. And I imagine that's probably something similar for you. Probably have a much bigger team than print journalists.
Not necessarily, no. No, I mean, public broadcasting is not what it used to be. So, no, usually I do radio and TV at the same time. I have a cameraman, a local fixer, translator, and that's it, basically. So, a three-man team also.
Same. Yeah. So, I would like to talk about the discussions and dilemmas in the newsroom. So, you are covering Gaza and Israel. It's really a polarizing debate. What kind of...
Do you reckon?
What kind, also on the news floor room, I guess?
Also, yeah. Opinions are really strong, and it's something you have to accommodate as well. I mean, and it hasn't happened with anything I've seen before, like not with Sudan, Yemen. I mean, opinions and are so strong that sometimes it interferes with journalism. So you have to find a way to discuss in the newsroom before you can get on to what is happening and how do we cover it. So that was...
Can you give an example about discussions in the newsroom?
Well, for example, do you call what is happening in Gaza a genocide or a likely genocide? Or do you call it a war? Do you call it an attack on Gaza, on Hamas, on the Palestinians, on Palestine? Do you call it Palestine or the occupied Palestinian territories? I mean, there's so many choices to make.
And what's your position in one of those debates?
Well, the general position is that you have to use language to get a message across. So you have to attribute directly what is happening, but you have to be factual. So I would not call it a genocide yet, personally, in the news, but you can ascribe to the Court of Justice and call it like a possible or likely genocide. But then if there's a big part of Holland that disagrees with you and stops listening right there, right then maybe...
When you call it
a genocide, so then maybe you still call it a war or whatever. But so that's... I don't have a fixed position, it's evolving. But for me the most important thing is that people continue to listen to what you have to say, because otherwise you can just preach to your own people and stop right there. And that's difficult. I mean, sometimes, in the beginning we sometimes would call the Israeli army the IDF. And I try to explain the news desk that IDF stands for Israeli Defense Force, and that Palestinians call it the IOF, the Israeli Occupation Force. So there you've got a political choice in one letter. So, and I don't care if you call it IDF as long as you realize that you just made a choice. So why not call it the Israeli army? Because that's what it is. And it's stuff like that. It's constant process of, well, at least think about what you say, think about the words you use, and think that sometimes not choosing is also a choice.
And do you feel the freedom to use the words that you want to use and make the news that you want to make?
Well, sometimes I think it's disappointing that, even as a public broadcaster, there's no government or somebody looking down on everyone. No, I feel like really I could and I still can contribute to the debate inside of NOS and contribute to the words that are being used. And so does Nasra Habiballah, our correspondent, who is based now in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. She has a big role to play in the decisions we make, of course, yeah.
I only, just on this note, because it's really interesting to think about not to compare them, but to think about Ukraine as well. And there are similar debates in Ukraine.
Yeah.
The Russians don't call it a war, they call it a special military operation.
And you talk about the occupied part of Ukraine, whereas people in Donetsk might beg to differ.
So, and actually the language that Alyssa and I have chosen to use has changed over the years. So we used to refer to the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic. At times we talked about non-governmental controlled territories and governmental controlled territories. Now I use the word occupied, actually guided, I would say, by the two team members who are from that specific territory, Donetsk city. But one of the differences, maybe it's too simple to say, but seems to be that in this part of the world, we have a uniformed idea of what's happening in Ukraine.
No.
Like most people, at least in liberal bubbles that we probably all exist in, don't believe Russian misinformation and propaganda. And we accept that it's the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, not the war in Ukraine, for example. So there are these two or many different ways to describe things. It's just we're more united in the West.
Oh, yeah.
About what's going on there.
Yeah, we all feel for the people in Kharkiv. Whereas in Israel-Palestine, it seems almost like if you feel for the people in Gaza, it automatically means you don't feel for the people in Tel Aviv and the other way around. And it shouldn't be a choice at all, but for some reason it is. And in Ukraine, it's not to that extent. It's there. Still people will ask you, do you know what happened in Donetsk before 2014? Mm-hmm. And there's layers there as well, but they're not as complicated, it seems, as they are in Israel. No, yeah.
Emmanuelle, can you tell us something about the discussions and dilemmas that you are facing?
I think lately, over the past few months, I've noticed more and more Russian disinformation in mainstream media that are being quoted by other media, and then there's that vicious circle of news that are not news, that are disinformation, but that appear in very respectable outlets. And the dilemma I face would be that I spend much more time than I would like to call newsrooms, some I'm working for, to tell them, please do not say that in the intro before coming to me, because this is Russian disinformation. Do not say that Donetsk is a Russian city. It is a city that is under Russian occupation, that goes against international law, and this doesn't respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine as recognized by the international law and international community as well. So in an ideal world, I would spend my time reporting and thinking about the next report, and sometimes also, just do also something else. And at the moment, when I'm not reporting or thinking about the next report, I am really stressed out because I have to double check what has been said in the report just before me or just after me, or how a report that I've done is being revoiced with something that contains elements of disinformation. And I think Russia has managed very well to infiltrate a lot of newsrooms without us knowing. Also, generally speaking, and this is a worry as well, I don't think it's proper just to Russia, but Russia has done it extensively, and this is something that we have to be careful because it can lead to very serious mistakes. Donetsk, for example, is not a Russian city, but also Crimea is also under occupation, and those are not just details, it's actually about respecting international law and respecting, what the international community has recognized or not, and the sovereignty of one country. And of course, living in that country, I'm acutely aware of those disinformation circulating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how do you deal with disinformation? Or I can also give an example to you and then let you think for a while. When it comes to the Arab hospital explosion, there was also a lot of...
what happened there?
Disinformation.
Yeah. Well, disinformation, I mean, you have to make a distinction between the fog of war, just not knowing real time what is happening.
Yeah.
Maybe make assumptions based on what happened in the past, make assumptions based on the news that you do get at that moment, and misinformation. I mean, there's a distinction, and misinformation is like intentional. It's aimed at like getting certain results in the public opinion. So the Arab hospital, I think that's more problematic because we just did not know. I don't have the feeling at that time that we were misinformed. But that's like one case. But
is there another case?
Well, I mean, what I do to try to arm myself against disinformation is putting myself in front of propaganda. So I like Russia Today. I love them. I love Fox News. I love the right-wing Israeli Arutz Sheva.
What do you love about them?
Because then I know if their way of arguing invokes a reaction in me. And I know the line of arguments, and that makes me more aware of the subtle influence that might be exerted through other channels. And it helps me actually to arm myself against disinformation. So please do listen to the grotesque opinions that you don't disagree with or that normally would not enter your bubble, in order to see how that narrative enters in a more subtle way. And I do it also by not only looking at Al Jazeera International, but also like the Arabic version, like to see the reporting there and the way of phrasing things there.
Is there also an example you can give when you reported news that was kind of fake or...
Reported news that was fake? Ooh, well, one of the things that I'm still not certain about is the actual number of deaths in Gaza. I mean, nobody is, and all we have to go on are like the numbers provided by the Hamas-run Ministry of Health. So, but then again, nobody knows, and I get pressed about that figure. Like, why do you use it? And it's the terrorists that. So you get where I get that complaint from. But they are right in a way. I mean, why do I use that number? And the only thing I can say is that it's like the only number that is out there, and also like Israeli media, Hebrew Israeli media, use that number. So you have to. And is that fake news? Maybe it is. Maybe Hamas doesn't even know. Maybe we are being influenced. I don't know. Are
there also other ways that in which you try to check that number?
Of course, you do it in multiple ways. Like check it with other numbers you get. See which organizations are using that number. Like if the UN uses it, it's easy journalism, I realize, but then maybe that it gives some ground because they may have investigated or have access to sources I don't have. But no, the only real way would be to go there and report. But that's something we cannot do, and that's it hurts every single day.
Nobody knows the numbers, right? Who could? I mean,
even in Ukraine, by the way.
Oh, for sure, because in Ukraine, we're relying on the number of Russian casualties being reported, but not the number of Ukrainians. And in Gaza, for example, even if you could get access, we don't know how many bodies are under the rubble. When you have that scale of destruction, like, I think for now it's impossible to know. And I mean, it's enough that it's a catastrophic amount of people.
No, but then at least you can add depth to stories. Like I was in Ukraine and we got word of a mass grave, and we went to check actually because we were close by, and there were 2 bodies. I mean, and it's really bad for the people that were shot and killed there, but it was not a mass grave. And so it adds depth to other claims that are being made. So, I mean, nothing beats just going there and be able to investigate yourself. I mean, of course you agree, but yeah.
I would like to...
And that's why we admire what you do in Kharkiv, by the way. I mean, you are there on a daily basis, and you go out there and check what is happening against what is provided by the Russian government and by the Ukrainian government, because they also have an interest in providing a certain image.
Absolutely, and if I can just add something on that evaluation of numbers, it's interesting that indeed we cannot really evaluate. We had Volodymyr Zelensky talking about 30,000 dead, and it gave us the first number of the war. But regardless, we know that it's probably much more, but regardless of the figure, what I base my estimates on, it will not give me a number, but it gives me a sense of what happens, is that, for example, when we see battles such as Bakhmut or Avdiivka, or now what is happening here in Kharkiv region, what you see when you live here, when you have a lot of Ukrainian friends, are the obituaries, are the posts on social media about relatives and families posting about their loved ones, and soldiers also posting about their brothers in arms who are either dead or injured. And you see that during those very, very fierce battles, there are more people getting injured, more people dying, and you see the impact it has on the society, on their relatives, on their families. And so we know, no doubt, that after this war, when we will find out how much how much this war has affected the population, we know that the number will be harrowing, will be a catastrophe, and we know that there's going to be also a problem here to rebuild the country, because demography will really have been dented by what is happening now. And so at the beginning, I was a bit upset as a reporter that I couldn't find this number, that nobody wanted to talk to us about it, because I thought they had to be transparent, even if I understand the security concerns there. But now I have to say that I don't need this number right now. I know it will be horrible when we will find out, but I can see what I can do as a reporter is that I can see what it causes to families, and I can report on that.
Yeah, and that is important. I mean, the soldiers, they die, of course, and in a way you can say that's what they are paid for, but the consequences to their families and the people in the area that you report from, I mean, those are the real stories, I think. Yeah.
Are there any questions from the audience? Yeah.
I don't know if it's already timing, but we, as the students who participated in the European dialogue, were tasked with asking questions. And I would just go ahead and do so.
Good job. Thank you very much.
I'm also very sorry for placing myself so inconveniently in the room. I will not reimburse for any neck injuries happening from this situation. So our question basically revolved around pressure and where pressure is coming from your profession. Also, as us who mainly study political science, we came up with a lot of theories and hypotheses that you probably feel a lot of pressure from, first of all, also your organization that you're working for, which might be a very interesting question for you working as an independent photojournalist for most of the time, but also the public and nowadays. And in this instance, I would specifically ask for unconventional places where you sometimes feel pressure from, which might be, for example, a journalistic community. I get it. Thank you.
Thanks.
Great question.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Shall I? Great question. Hang on a sec.
You cannot pass it to me because you did that before, so you have to answer.
No, I just need to think about the answer. Well, I suppose the one thing is true, that I don't really have any pressure from anywhere, like from a commissioner or, an employer, as it were. But we obviously still have to find outlets to publish our work. We're going out and telling these stories, and we need to reach an audience. So through social media, we can bypass the gatekeepers a little bit, but we still need legacy media. And it became almost impossible to find anyone to publish our stories right up until the full-scale Russian invasion. So the summer we had, Alyssa and I are just friends. We go to Donbass to spend summers together. Her husband comes sometimes. A friend came along. We met my mum in Kiev. It's just was part of our a couple of times a year we'd go together. And the summer before the full-scale invasion, Alyssa just said to me, like, look, really no one's interested in this story anymore. We can't find any more editorial hooks or angles. We're constantly being asked, but what's changed? But what's changed? And the point is that nothing had. And so we kind of said, well, I guess that's the end of our project then, because we're telling stories so that for people to read them and look at them. So that obviously changed with the full-scale Russian invasion. Now after 9 years of working together, we suddenly got funding that will cover us for the next 2 years. But so I suppose the limitations are just in accessing an audience as a freelance photographer and writer. And actually, Alyssa is 5 years into a PhD at Princeton University in anthropology, because she wants to do long-form storytelling, and we can't find a way to have that supported by traditional news media. So as an anthropologist, she gets funding through the university. And for me, I just published my first collection of poetry, and I have a grant from the British Arts Council to keep writing poems about the war in Ukraine, which helps me to keep going financially while we're doing the work that I shared with you tonight. That's a very long-winded answer, but I think, yes, I'm going to wrap up now.
Emmanuelle, do you also have pressure, or do you feel pressure, and what kind of pressure, from who?
I don't feel the pressure from the newsrooms I work for, but that's because I'm lucky that there are media which are respectful towards the correspondence. I'll just give you an example of not really pressure, but of the feeling of just being supported. Earlier on, when I was 10 kilometers away from Vovchansk, we had to leave the center of reception of internally displaced people we were at, simply because intelligence said it might be bombed imminently, you all have to leave. And I just texted my editor at Ouest to tell him, we're getting out, it's getting dangerous. And he was immediately he was on the phone, he was trying to reach out, he was really worried, and I was fine. I was in the car going back to Kharkiv, and he was really behind me to make sure I was okay. And on the opposite side, when I'm out reporting, he absolutely trusts me. It's also based on the trust you can have with your editor. And in that case, he wouldn't pressure me with a deadline. He knows that when I'm ready to write, when I'm ready to deliver, I'm going to deliver the article. And sometimes it can be really long because life gets in the way. You might have other reporting ongoing that are a bit more pressing. And when you have an editor that is really supportive in that way, it makes all the difference, because others can be pressuring you and they might not realize that sometimes you are just a human being and you cannot deliver exactly what was supposed to be delivered. I had that when I was covering the liberation of Izium. When it was liberated, there was those mass graves discovered, and I've been there on the very early days when bodies were being exhumed. But the thing is that I was supposed to go 1 day earlier than I was, and it had been cancelled by the army for security reasons. And I had one editor at a media who was cross at me because the BBC had reported on it before. And they were like, well, if the BBC can do it, why can't you? And I was there, I was like, well, because the army said I couldn't go for security reasons. And this was unnecessarily stressful. I was there as a reporter, and by the way, I was in Balaklia that day reporting on torture chambers, so I was not being idle in Kharkiv waiting for the doors of Izium to magically open. And I was there with my press vest, my helmet, my team, and I really felt depleted, and I felt powerless. And it was just that one person who probably hadn't been on the ground before, but it's those little moments where you're asking yourself, oh, am I a bad reporter because I didn't get access, or am I going to be fired because I didn't deliver this report? And it's really down to who you're talking to in the newsroom, really.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Emmanuelle Chaze, also for your dangerous work over there to get us informed. I want to thank you. I want to thank you, Anastasia, also. And I want to make a change. So, applause. to welcome Boyko Vassilev. He's a journalist, producer, and presenter of Panorama, weekly program at Bulgarian National TV. He was active in reporting major events on the peninsula, if I say it correctly.
Yes.
The Bosnian and Kosovo War, the NATO bombing of Yugoslavia, and events in Macedonia. And he covered the Syrian war in 2012 and Iraq in 2015. Did I already say this?
I don't know what you are about to say.
Because
just repeat it.
It feels like I already introduced you.
Me?
Did I introduce?
You introduced me, I think.
Yeah, correctly.
You can do it again.
Did I do it correctly?
Yeah, you did.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was afraid I introduced you with this line.
No.
Throughout his career, he has interviewed many international leaders such as George W. Bush, Tony Blair, Gerhard Schröder, and Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Welcome.
Nice.
And also, I want to welcome Veronika Dorman. She's a journalist and former Russia correspondent, and in 2023, she published the book Un peuple qui marche, les Russes sous Poutine Opa. She currently works for the daily French newspaper Libération. Also a warm welcome for her. Yeah. Oh, and now the chair is empty. That's also really...
No, she's back.
Okay. What did you recognize from the former discussion we had?
Everything, pretty much. So I have been on both sides because I started as a reporter in the field. I was a correspondent in Russia for 7 years and a freelancer, as a freelancer. So I started from afar, not knowing anyone in the newsroom. So the only contact I had was a voice on the phone and sometimes a very short email and sometimes no answers at all. And so this is how I started my journalistic career. And then when I moved on, in the past 4 years, I have been on the other side as a deputy editor for the foreign desk of Libération. So I was the one making phone calls and fixing the deadlines, and sometimes probably being obnoxious to people on the ground because a deadline is unfortunately something we have to respect.
And do you also ask questions sometimes, I want to have this story today?
So I think the fact that, and we are very lucky at Libération at our foreign desk, is that a lot of the journalists and especially in the editors are former reporters and former freelancers. We all started as freelancers on the ground and then we joined the newsroom. And so we know how it works from experience. And so I think that helps us a lot to when we commission a story, we're not perfect, but I think that's a bias we probably don't have because we have been on the ground and we do know what you said very importantly earlier, that the story is there and you don't come up with it. You have to go first and see what there is. And it doesn't matter what Reuters has written before or the AFP or the New York Times. You have to find your own way of telling. Even if you end up telling the same story, you have to find, you have to have your own angles and your own quotes and your own heroes and characters for that story. So on a very personal level, it's always been very helpful for us to manage our reporters in that way, because we know that we can't. But sometimes, and it's also a constant fight when you're an editor, because you want to have the same stories as the New York Times, because you want to say, okay, the BBC went there, so you also go there. It's a temptation.
So you do ask that question.
We don't ask. It's a temptation. We have to. We're like, come on, we're not worse than them, are we? And so it's
just smaller.
We're just smaller, or and it. Very often it comes down to means, and that's another thing about the coverage, especially of covering the war in Ukraine is very expensive, if you think about it, because a fixer and a driver and insurances and commissioning a freelancer or sending someone from the newsroom from Paris is still a a few thousand, maybe for a couple of weeks it can go up to 5,000, 6,000 euros, which is, for newspaper, it's a lot of money. So we have to, and it's very annoying and very, humiliating to have to count the money when you're doing something so important as covering a war. But it's the reality as well, and
so a lot of topics.
Yeah,
maybe we can talk about that later on also. Boyko, do you think it also has an advantage that you're a presenter now, but you also worked at the ground?
Yes, I did, and I'm worried a little bit about the discussion because I agree with almost everything. What kind of discussion will be if I agree? But yes, I did that long time ago in another era, in another war, which is unfortunately almost forgotten because even a philosopher like Habermas said that 77 years in Europe there was no war, and he obviously forgot the Balkans or he doesn't consider them Europe. But I would ask, actually I will tell a story. Actually, a very short story. And I will ask myself, because I did ask myself at that time, where does the problem come from? And,
which problem?
The problem with the reporting, the problem with the truth, the problem with the stereotypes, the whole, everything what the discussion is all about. And let me tell you a very short story. 1999, I was in Pristina in Kosovo, and this was right in the middle of this crisis which turned into the bombardment later, but this was a particular very dirty sidekick of this war that actually cafes were burning in Pristina, were being blown up, and innocent people died on both sides, Albanians and Kosovo Serbs. And one such explosion did appear, and we just like journalists were summoned there to see. And this was the pre-internet, pre-social media era, pre-smartphone era. So we had to see this with our own eyes and to report with some prehistorical phones to our editors. What do we see? What do we see? And what do we see? It was something I will never forget. If you think that you can step into blood, it's not a metaphor. You can literally step into blood, and blood can flow into a river. And into this midst of decomposed bodies, there was a body of a dead girl. And we had to do our journalistic work and to call and to say something about this girl. And I said on my phone, it's a girl about 14 years old. One of the colleagues said 13 years old, around 12 years old, even 10 years old. So we went back to the hotel, and then came the official announcement. And the announcement turned out that the girl was 18. And I will never forget her name, Vlora Humoli, an Albanian. And then conspiracy theories emerged that, yes, because you're anti-Serbs, then you say that this girl is younger. You say that this girl is much younger, that this is a kid. And I was there. I did this mistake myself, and I know it was not a conspiracy theory. Nobody told me that. My eyes have been fooled me. My eyes, because I was in the blood, because I was under shock. So my theory out of that is that our eyes are lying in the best possible way. And we are human beings, but as a journalists, our most important work is to question ourselves.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I mean, the fact that you realize and that you took lessons, that's the first and only step that you can take. And I always realize that I cannot even look behind me. So I can see what happens in this room. I cannot see the back rows. how can I possibly tell what is happening outside on the streets? Maybe, I mean, you said it was raining. You're right, by the way, it was raining. I was inside, I was like, no, it's nice weather. So you have to be aware of your limitations. You have to actively look for your limitations, because otherwise you think you are without mistakes, and that's when you start making them.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is us, ourselves. And sometimes journalism has become a profession of people with ties, of people who look at themselves with great, great estimation. No, we have to be the ones who are under scrutiny, first from ourselves, then from the whole society. Now we have an additional problem, because we were talking about stereotypes. The additional problem is social media, because stereotypes and bias, they come first, then they flourish into social media, and then we, journalists from mainstream media, we feel obliged to listen what social media is dictating us, being like a silent or almost hidden dictator to what we do, and we have to oppose this dictator. And because, this is a very peculiar situation in Bulgaria, unlike in Western Europe, where Gaza is dividing, and Ukraine is almost certain, with us is vice versa.
Yeah.
The society is divided on Ukraine, on particular historical reasons. And then, because we try to report the truth as it is, as we can, as possibly we can, what happens is we lose the confidence of our public. We lose the confidence because they don't see what their prejudice dictate them. They see something which they don't want to believe, and then we have to face this also.
And is there something you can do about it?
What can we do is to go after the truth and risk being booed on the street, risk hearing the most impossible things about yourself, to risk losing viewership.
Yeah.
But
social media amplifies it, but it doesn't create the people looking upon you with opinions and thinking that therefore you are biased. I mean, older people here may know Edo Rosenthal, who used to be the correspondent in Israel-Palestine. I succeeded him. And we're talking like mid-last century, like ages ago. And he already told me people are prejudiced and therefore think you are. I mean, it has been there for like, God knows how long. But social media, and that's where you're right, it amplified it like multifold, yeah.
But I think there is also a danger when we gather in the morning around the table for the first meeting in the newsroom, and somebody will say, oh, there's a shitstorm on Twitter, we should do something about it. And when you look into it, most of the time, the shitstorm is just a little community of people, the ones that we are following, the ones who follow us, and we see something amplified that is not yet amplified. And it's truer for local politics, for instance. It's very true in France. And our journalism starts to be influenced by that. So we feel that we need to answer something that was born, a debate that was born on social media at some point, which is probably not as big or not yet as big, and then we fuel it with our own arguments, and it becomes something bigger than it was originally. And I think a lot of anger is also built on that, and it can be on any topic, and we have that discussion every day.
Exactly. But somehow every age has a dominant media. And somehow I feel that we, the television, are not the dominant media.
We've been called legacy media by some.
So you have this instinct to have with one eye what the shitstorm on Twitter is. And this audience is very important. It's maybe a minority, but it's important and vocal minority. And this is the truth we are living in. Maybe the first time in the history of the world, so many people have a voice. and many of them are not as decent as, for example, Mrs. Taylor-Lind. And they all provide pictures. This is very important. They all provide pictures, and their pictures are not like her. We don't know who produced the pictures. We don't know where these pictures come from. And these pictures have enormous emotional power to influence people. One picture can make a political decision, but...
what's the difference? Because also there can also be one picture from a journalist that can make a big decision.
Syrian boy on the beach.
Yeah.
You know, even journalistic pictures are questionable. We know about this famous photography from the Spanish Civil War of Capa, who is filming a dying soldier, and we still don't know if this picture was staged or not. We still don't know, and it was 30 and something. So the difference, though, there is important difference when you have a name, and you have an organization, and you have an editors, and you know where this picture comes from, and you can make this your decision whether to believe or not. But I'm sorry to say this because I work for television, but pictures are the most subjective things now. They used to be the most objective thing, but now they are the most subjective thing because all warring sides produce picture on massive scale, and most of these pictures which the warring sides produce are propaganda. Doesn't mean if it's propaganda is for good purpose or not, but it is. So our job has become, again, to question this picture, to ask questions about that, and to cool them up. Because as hotter to cool them up, the hotter they are, the most problematic they are. So we have to cool them up. We have to ask the questions, what do we see on the picture? And is there something like a prime emotion out of us which is making a bad judgment? You know, just 2 sentences on your question. What can happen? Famous Slovenian writer have told me about one picture from the beginning of Yugoslav wars, where, you know, Serb nationalists tend to have long hairs and long beards, and they were called Chetniks. And there's a picture, Chetnik is arrested somewhere in Croatia. But you see close the picture, you put out your emotions, you cool down, and you see that he has a T-shirt of Iron Maiden, and he was perhaps not a Chetnik, but he was perhaps a heavy metal fan. So, you know, it's this cooling up of this rational mind towards picture which I'm advocating. And
it's a process as well, and I think we are somewhere along this process. For example, we learned from Ukraine and from Israel Gaza that you have to check every image you get to basically open source intelligence, every video that you get. And at first we were like, we cannot wait, the 8 o'clock news is now, and the images is all over the internet, and now we feel confident enough, like as soon as we don't have a green light from our own OSINT team, we don't publish, period, full stop. And that's something, self-confidence that had to grow. And I think also media have to become like legacy media have to become social media savvy in a way. Like it's a process, I think. Yeah.
Veronika?
I was thinking about when you mentioned earlier the hospital in Gaza, the first information we have, and I was in the newsroom that day, and we all have this crazy numbers of hundreds of people who have perished in this bombing, and we have no ways of checking anything. But the deadline, we're coming close to the deadline, and we have to do something. So we put conditionnel and say what we think we know by now, and because there's a problem of a printed newspaper is that it goes to print at 8 o'clock and it comes out the next morning. So there's this whole night of, and so there's this big dilemma what to do with that. And then once it goes to print, then the info comes in that it's not that bad, it's not that big, we don't know, it's misinformation, we didn't check, but the damage is done. And that's the thing, is that once the first snap of these huge numbers have been out, many people react very emotionally to that first information, and all of these people will not go back, the viewers I'm saying about outside of the newsroom, will not go back to verify and to read our own fact-checking, our own returning on our steps and saying, oh, you know, we have been misled, whatever. And you have seen it with the protests that sparked afterwards in the Arab world, because for them that's all they needed, is this crazy, huge number that was, it didn't matter whether it was real or not. It got out there, and then it doesn't belong to us anymore. And that's also, I don't know how, I mean, I guess every newsroom has a way to deal with it, but we're all in this together. Like we have participated in provoking a reaction, a chain reaction, and we can say, okay, we're very honest, we're fact-checking, we're coming back, we're writing correctums, erratums, and saying, you know, we have done our job, but it doesn't. This information does not belong to us anymore, and it's out there.
Still agreeing?
Oh yeah, it's boring. Sorry. Yeah.
And what do and what don't you show? And do you think there has been a change over the years?
I'm sorry, didn't.
What do and what don't you show if it comes to war?
As visually, or
but also stories that you tell.
We show whatever we can. I mean, the big problem with these two wars going on that we're discussing is that in the case of Russia and Ukraine, we have a lot of access to the Ukrainian side. We do not have access, our Western journalists do not have access to the occupied territories, and less to Russia, to what's going on there. So it's a disbalanced on the part of kind of reporting. It's
but when it comes to violence,
I don't think. I mean, it depends. Like when we have a picture of a burning body, we decided not to print it, but at the last moment, it has been like it was in the hospital in Mariupol, for instance. There was this picture of Evgeny Malolyetka, very. Or no, it wasn't. It was him, but it was not in Mariupol. So he got somewhere right after a bombing, and there was a burning body in the middle of the picture. It was a beautiful picture, breathtaking, and we wanted to publish it. And it stayed there on the page for hours. And then at the last moment, somebody decided that it was a bit too graphic, but it wasn't. So there's not a clear line of we're not going to do this or that, or then we won't publish faces of children, or we won't publish a picture of somebody whose family doesn't know whether he's dead or not. But I don't. In a newspaper, I don't know if it's how it works on TV, but in a newspaper we don't have a limit on. It's basically we publish as much as we can, because we also know that. The access is limited, and journalists cannot work as they would want to work in Gaza, and so whatever we have, and which is also probably dangerous because we tend to throw everything in, maybe without enough thinking about it and without analyzing in advance.
I fully agree, and in war, limitations should be as wide as possible. Because without showing violence on the war, how should we convince people that war is wrong?
And horrible.
Here I'm categorical, but I have other limitations, other problems. I remember, again in Kosovo in the 90s, when we went to a peasant family and a husband was kidnapped. And then a journalist came before us and he said, if you cry in front of my camera, I will bring your husband back. And, you know, these things I never do. You know, maybe I had some advantage because I always knew the language where the countries which I was covering. I didn't need a local fixer. But these things to emotionalize a situation by yourself in order to have better picture, and to say that this is a justification because, you know, this side is right, and why shouldn't the guy cry a little bit more on the camera to make this report more emotional? No, I don't think that, I don't film this, and I don't show people who will suffer because of my TV report. I never do this.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. No, I mean, I remember in Syria, we went to visit a mosque where Bashar al-Assad went to pray end of Ramadan. And we just wanted to talk to somebody from the neighborhood, and there was this guy who just came out of the mosque, and he started telling about, yeah, and we know, and there were snipers on the roofs and stuff like that, and we noticed a shabih, like a ghost, like the real bad Secret Service, approaching us. So we said, don't talk about this. And the shabih was kind of nice, so he said, don't talk about this. And we were like, we don't need this part of the story, we just... And for some reason, this guy kept blurting out this line like the snipers on the roof. And we, like our team, we moved out of, pulled out of the street, and it didn't feel right. So we went back to check on this guy, and he was gone, and the shabih as well. So probably, I don't know what happened to him, I don't want to imagine, but the tricky thing is you never know what happens to the people you talk to, or you can, and you have to protect them, but even then sometimes you fail.
If you know,
you report that? Like first the discussion and then the...
well, obviously I did not use that part of the footage, because if he was still alive, I did not want to make it worse for him, and I learned a big lesson from it. Like, I get to go to my hotel, and worst thing is maybe they will ban me from the country, as they did for a while. But likely I won't be killed over a thing like that. But the people you interview, they often do.
Yeah, I'm standing because I want to have one last question from the audience before we wrap up. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Hi. I have a question. How much do you feel of like a political influence? Because I think if you look at the current two wars, if you look at Western society, they might have a little bit, they have like money staked in maybe Ukraine and Israel. How much do you feel that they have influence in what you say and which side you show most?
Well, I try to minimize that influence by not thinking about it too much, because I realize I do have an influence, but I mean, where does it take you when you start acting on that? Like, so I don't read comments on X anymore, for example, because that's the way people try to influence you in a direct way, and try to discuss a lot with colleagues like you, and try to listen to the people that know and might know something that is more than just an opinion or just a influence. Yeah.
Very good question. And here you can make two errors. One error is to follow this influence and let this influence actually do your work. But the other error is more common, to put you in a contrarian position, and you think, well, there is an influence on one side, so maybe for that reason the other side is right. So if George Bush was wrong, that didn't make Milosevic right.
No.
This is what I can explain in this way. So you can make either of these errors, but I think it's wrong.
Yeah, and also one of the common error at newsrooms is to think that if you balance both complaints, then you are in the middle and you are right. I mean, the truth is seldom in the middle. I mean, so there's, but you, I mean, I think the basic takeaway here is challenge yourself, like, constantly, and that's the only thing you can do, but it's the thing you have to do.
Thank you so much. I have to wrap up, but don't worry, there's also a third round at the bar. And there's also a next program, Europe at War, that starts 8:30. So thank you so much for my wonderful guests, and also thank you for watching.
Thank you.